Indian Express Think is a thought-provoking forum that brings together thought leaders, policymakers, corporate leaders to encourage a substantive exchange of ideas and get the best minds to give it direction and solutions. The series will center on the holistic perspective of urbanization in India. I'm delighted to share a glimpse about the series. Can you kindly play on the AV, please?
India is on the brink of a transformative urban evolution. With only 31% of the population residing in cities, according to the 2011 census, the need for focused urban development to unlock India's full potential is undeniable. The World Bank predicts over 600 million urban residents by 2036. But without proper governance, this surge could strain infrastructure, worsen climate issues, and affect city living. To achieve the ambitious goal of cities contributing 75% of India's GDP by 2030, effective governance is crucial to foster innovation, entrepreneurship, and job creation. India requires $840 billion by 2036 to adequately invest in urban infrastructure. Additionally, cities across India need an estimated $1.2 trillion in capital funding by 2030 to meet the demands of their burgeoning populations. Developing affordable housing and expanding access to basic amenities, healthcare, education, and a clean environment for all residents are crucial to enhancing overall quality of life. What can Indian cities learn from the global experience to become better governed? What lessons can Indian cities draw from our own experience? Does the solution require minor legislative changes, or are deep structural changes needed? To make sense of India's urbanization, the Indian Express and the Omidyar Network India present a series of discussions on our cities, scrutinizing the challenges and the growth markers that can make Indian cities truly smart and meet our citizens' evolving aspirations.
Today's session will host a special keynote address by Professor M.V Rajeev Gowda, Vice Chairman of the State Institute for Transformation of Karnataka and former Member of Parliament, followed by an insightful panel discussion, Making Indian Cities Future Ready for Our Citizens. The session is live on social media handles of the Indian Express. Ladies and gentlemen, may I please request Mr. Udit Misra, Associate Editor, The Indian Express, to join us on stage for the welcome address.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. This is part of a series of seminars that Indian Express and Omidyar Network is organizing on Indian cities. And the idea behind it is to have a everyday regular conversation so that people can understand on what ails with our urbanization and how to set it right. We've had one episode in the last year in December, which was the first edition of this seminar series. This is the second one, and we are also having satellite town halls on this issue in various other cities. We had one in Pune in January. This is the second edition, and we are focusing this time on urban infrastructure. Now, it can become very technical, but so I wanted to actually start off with something that perhaps might hit home. When we are buying our cars, it is quite remarkable that increasingly everybody is buying SUVs. And the first feature that we typically look at is the ground clearance, and more than anything else. And that to me is the Indian voter or the Indian consumer or the Indian citizen, city citizen at least, basically his or her vote of no confidence to all road making that happens in India. Because, you do not trust whether the roads will be there for you when some rain happens or whether you go to a by-lane. And that just captures, in essence, what ails with our infrastructure. I come from Delhi since 1999 when I've been seeing that city. It has been dug up in various ways. Many good things have happened, but it has remained chock-a-block if you talk about traffic speed or housing. One of the major pain points for young couples in Delhi is getting their kids into nursery. The pandemic showed the true state of health provisioning in cities. Rural India often didn't get even reported, so we don't know. But cities really, it was very clear to everybody. The point is that, as we saw in the AV, there are fantastic numbers, macro numbers, everything running into millions, billions, and trillions. But the reality is that it is all predicated on the fact that cities will actually do their job of creating jobs, of creating that growth. Rural India is not going to create that kind of growth. So the question is not so much about just the infrastructure of a city because it's Bangalore or Delhi or roads. The question is whether these cities, the way we are approaching them, is really attuned to achieving that growth target. What we are hoping to do as a country is to become a developed country in the next 25, 30 years. Regardless of what targets you set, you would imagine that per capita incomes will go up by 3 times or 4 times. That puts enormous pressure. The amount of people that are coming into cities is likely to double. Where are they going to stay? What kind of housing would they have? Would they have health provisioning? Would their kids have education? Because it's not just about the job. What kind of jobs would they have? What happens to climate change and emission? Something that actually is not reported as much in media in our country. But what happens to emissions? I mean, Delhi is one city where we can, like clockwork, realize that every November you will not be able to breathe, no matter what. And that hasn't gone. So, are we looking at similar scenarios in Lucknow, Patna, Jaipur? Are we just waiting for that to happen and then keep banning cars which have just been bought? So the question is to look at many of these issues. And I won't take any more time, but in terms of challenges, we'll hear from Mr. Gowda and also in the panel discussion. In terms of challenges, there are many, from financing to whose responsibility is it, who's accountable for cities' growth. I myself have written many articles about what happened in China or what happened in London or Latin American cities. but none of those are plug and play models. We have our own country, our own system, and we need to figure out our own solutions. So infrastructure is the bedrock for that, and this edition of the seminar series is important from that perspective. We have a fantastic panel coming at the same issue from very different angles. So hopefully we'll have a very enriching discussion, something that all of you can understand and take some insights away. So thanks a lot for this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mishra, for joining us on stage. Now may I please request Mr. Professor M.V. Rajeev Gowda, Vice Chairman of the State Institute for Transformation of Karnataka and former Member of Parliament, to kindly join us on stage to address our audience, please.
That's okay. Hello, namaskara, good evening. It's really appropriate that the Indian Express has come to Bengaluru with this particular topic, focusing on urban issues. Because if you were to think about modern India, or very, very recent India, a lot of the urban engagement with urban India and its challenges has emanated from this city. We, in the late 1999 to 2004, we had the Bangalore Agenda Task Force, which was an initiative of many people who had succeeded in this city in different other dimensions, in industry, etc., who came together working with government to say, let's make this city future ready, let's make it, let's provide basic services to everybody, because urban was not really on the policy agenda. And there was a government change in 2004, at which point these same gentlemen, there's no consensus in the city that everything that they did is correct. There are also other civil society activists who say, who elected them to make policies for us? Okay, all that is part of the vibrant, the political landscape that shows a very, very engaged citizenry who are concerned about the city, but also are happy to combat about these sorts of issues. So the same team went to Delhi, where the UPA government had come in. And their engagement led to the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, right? The first major acknowledgement that India was rapidly urbanizing. And that something needed to be done about it, okay? You should permit me one silly joke while I talk about this. My former colleague in the Rajya Sabha, Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, I was attending one of his speeches when he was Urban Development Minister in the first Modi cabinet. And he made a statement. He said, India is rapidly urbanizing. In the last NDA government, I was Rural Development Minister. Today, I'm Urban Development Minister, he said. But the basic point is, that's how he speaks, of course, you know that. But the basic point is, India, the pace of urbanization is really, way, way more rapid than the policy systems can cope with, okay? And we are partly saying this from the point of view of the mega cities, the Delhis, Mumbais, Bengalurus. But really, this urbanization is happening in every taluk headquarter, every district headquarter, without paying attention to the larger consequences of that urbanization. Now, you just mentioned, Udit, that Delhi, from November onwards, nobody wants to really be there, because I happen to maintain a residence there because I head the Congress Party's research department. But during this entire winter period, not only is it cold, it's also too polluted to breathe. So thanks to online, the ability to work online, I just choose to pay rent and not show up. That's how it is. And Mumbai is joining Delhi in terms of bad air quality. So what future ready? There are no, citizens are going to die much earlier as a result of bad air quality. And because this is a diffuse problem, and over time, people are not agitated enough about it. You're not noticing what the real challenge is. But the challenge actually is partly because even our city, Bengaluru, adds practically as many vehicles as we add people. So I'm not getting into specific statistics, etc. But this is a city that, just like America used to be the locus for brain drain from the rest of the world, Bengaluru is the place where all the brains of India moved, right? But this is where the action is, this is where the opportunities are. And when that happens, the pace of growth is phenomenal, and we are responding partly because the private sector, we're in a hall belonging to one of the leading builders of this city. But if you were to say, oh, isn't the job of providing housing for citizens the responsibility of the Bangalore Development Authority? Well, there are tens of lakhs of people who have moved in, and the BDA may have been able to create layouts for a few thousand of them, right? So another sector has to emerge to respond to that one fundamental challenge. But when you start thinking along those lines about what do citizens want, what do they need, etc., they need, as you mentioned, infrastructure. They need, education and healthcare and numerous other things. But the very, when you come out of your homes and you're on the road, as you pointed out, that's when you think of the government, and often you think about the government when you're cursing it, saying, hey, they haven't fixed the traffic. Our Joint Commissioner Traffic who's on the panel hasn't shown up. He must be stuck in a traffic jam, right? Okay, that's the kind of situation that we face in this city. But why is that? Because we didn't put in place the public transport infrastructure, ahead of time, right? Other kinds of, and that we're fixing that. We've got 2 major metro lines, many more on the way. And once the network kicks in, the transformation will happen. We are already seeing 2 measures. One, the completion of the 2nd metro line that goes to Whitefield. But even more than that, a policy measure from the Siddaramaiah-led Congress government called the Shakti scheme, which opened up bus travel in government buses for women, made it free for them, right? And suddenly, there's so much more demand for public transport that the government is coming up with innovative methods of financing to introduce more and more buses. So as that happens, you will start to see the movement from personal to public becoming more prominent. Now, we all grew up in the city cycling around. Now it's, it seems either too dangerous or the surfaces are not very conducive, this is a part of the problem. But we wouldn't even it's not even easy to walk around, right? Those basic infrastructure for pedestrians is also a bit of a challenge. And there's another larger what you might call policy challenge that, well, by the way, I must say that in this short 15-20 minutes, it's hard to give you anything more than vignettes of the kinds of challenges urban India faces. And even the panel also will face the same challenge of a bit of a time constraint, because this is a city that is engaged with these issues substantially, and we can spend days and days on different angles of urban challenges, right? So what we have done is, here's a city built around numerous villages. Historically, we've just taken over their farmlands, sometimes repurposed their irrigation tanks, and in the process, we've managed to house a large number of people. We've planned to, there's been, what shall we say, a herd movement to create offices in the same outer ring road space or something like that. There's been that kind of critical mass that has developed in particular locations. All of these have not necessarily been planned way ahead of time, right? And a lot of this has been retrofitted onto the city as it grew. And so we are actually a city with not necessarily slums like Mumbai, but we have our old villages, which have lost their pasture lands, and that's why their cows are on our street. We have, we've lost the linkages between our lakes, as a result of which this city at 3,000 feet elevation, when you have a burst of rain, you end up with flooding and people sometimes losing their lives. That is certainly an avoidable tragedy. Anyway, what else is going on? The city has been rapidly expanding in a manner where the governance structures, so now that I am speaking more from the policy-making side, the governance structures have just not been able to keep pace. It's all reactive. So what do I mean by this, right? So there is, first a Bangalore Municipal Corporation, and then it gets expanded to a greater Bangalore Municipal Corporation, incorporating 100 plus villages, etc. Okay? When you grow the jurisdiction, you haven't paid attention to, is there enough water for everyone? Have you been able to put in place the infra, etc.? What you're doing is, you're discovering when you grow that, all these areas that are now part of the larger city were under village panchayats. They had their own governance structures. They gave their own permissions for farmers to convert their land and to build what are called revenue layouts without any consideration for even basic infrastructure like drainage or roads or anything like that. And then suddenly you'll find that those areas are now part of the Whitefield conurbation or something like that. And you need to figure out how are you going to even get a bus into those smaller areas. But those were decisions that were taken under the existing arrangement, right? So we can't just throw them out, but we have to figure out a way to retrofit, and that's been a real challenge. The other challenge is, when you think about the political economy of all this growth, it turns out that as the city attracts more and more talent from elsewhere, as the city's growth picks up, land becomes extraordinarily more valuable. And this changes the dynamics of who gets to participate in the political process, who gain from water shortages, who gain from certain other kinds of waste management contracts. I mean, the political economy, which exists in contrast to the ideal sense of how a city should be governed, the reality is something totally different. And this, I'm not absolving the citizens, because you will find that in a small road where you're not supposed to build more than 2 floors, some people will build 5. And then there's a huge pressure on the political class to bring in what's called akrama sakrama, which means anything that is wrong, please regularize it, which means legalize it, right? Okay. And if the public puts pressure on the politician, what is the politician to do? Figure out a way to say, okay, one time we'll do this, okay? And in 5 years, one time we'll do it again. That sort of a situation creates the wrong incentives, but this is what has been going on. At the same time, if you were to look at the administrative aspect of the whole thing, the city administration, the people who are in charge of delivering these services, who are in charge of sort of coping with this dramatic growth and transformation, are often stuck in paradigms that were out of date 50 years ago, who have not been necessarily trained to engage with this kind of rapid urbanization, who are still thinking about sprawl rather than newer concepts like the 15-minute city or things like that, where you would change the way people live and work and play in a more focused manner. So those sorts of situations, we certainly also don't have the expertise to think about how are we going to raise resources, possibly through municipal bonds and other topics, other such instruments that would enable you to go out there and build on the potential of the city and its growth, right? At the same time, though, this city, more than 20 years ago, came up with something called the self-assessment scheme for taxes, where we said, look, if we won't have the official class harass you. You decide, based on some broad guidelines, what is your appropriate tax. We will trust the citizen to come up with the right valuation. Of course, after 5-10 years, we are seeing that a lot of people are not paying their appropriate tax levels or tax rates, but we're now using different kinds of technologies to ascertain where the underpayment is, and hopefully we'll be able to fix that. So when you start thinking along these lines, you start to you realize that the ability of the political and administrative class to respond to these changes is still limited, is still reactive, and that's a real bit of a challenge. But it's not for a shortage of effort. So, for example, we do want to move people, not necessarily vehicles. That's well understood, right? And so we've been talking about different ways we can do that. Buses is one of the things that we talked about, and the metro's reach will really change the game. But recently, when the metro line was completed to Whitefield, right, it opened up one crucial growth engine of the city and connected it with everyone else. On that occasion, our government, I actually took the lead on this, decided that why stop with this Whitefield? There's the outer ring road where 9.5 lakh technology employees are present. Why don't we introduce a metro feeder bus that would, traverse that ring road in 5-minute intervals? Because then people would find that this is the best way to move around. Okay, and initially there was a certain amount of pushback from the system, but once we pushed it through with cooperation from the companies that operate out of there, then we were able to, I'm happy to say that many more metro feeder buses have been launched. So this is the broad category of first and last mile connectivity. If we brought in quick loops of smaller buses in your neighborhoods, which would get you to the nearest metro, reasonably predictably in 5-10 minutes, okay? Why would you want to go through the stress of driving yourself, okay? And frankly, these sorts of interventions, if you can get people off the road in terms of driving themselves, you will actually have a much more productive workforce. Those $1 trillion economy forecasts will become more feasible because the people who show up at work are not going to be so exhausted from the commute. Okay, so these are possibilities. But let me take a step back and talk about the citizens and future ready. Well, how do we make that happen, right? So we've been thinking, just like this example that I gave you, for 15, 20 years, we've been pushing for, in this city, suburban rail. For those of you who may not be aware of what the concept is, you know that Mumbai essentially survives on its suburban rail network. What we've been arguing in this city is that we have the Indian Railways infrastructure, right? So we don't need new infrastructure. And that infrastructure can be utilized for intra-city transportation, okay? And in 2008, I held a workshop for our ministers and MLAs saying that this is not just for Bangalore, it's also useful to all our towns on the outside where these regular railways go. We have railway lines that exist going in 8 different directions, right? Anyway, the Indian Railways sees this as a loss-making proposition. Even my 6 years in Parliament kept knocking our heads on a very, very tough wall. And it's still not, there's movement, and there is something called the Suburban Rail Corporation that's taking this forward, but it's still very slow. When you would think of it as a no-brainer, right? If you've been to some of the big, megapolises, New York City or London or any of these places, Paris, you have, along with the metros, you have the suburban rail, which will get you to the towns that are a certain distance away, or to the airport, right? Those sorts of things. Anyway, that's moving slowly. They're adding a whole new rail infrastructure with better signaling, etc. So there is movement in that direction. In addition, we are thinking about many other dimensions. And the one that I want to mention to you is something that one of our panelists is very actively involved with. This is called the Bangalore Climate Action Plan. Okay, so after Mumbai, Bangalore is the second city in this country to decide to take something called a climate action plan forward. And this is, we are saying we want to be future ready. What does that mean? We understand that we're going to see lots of vagaries in terms of climate and climate change. What that means for us is more erratic rain patterns, more heat island effects, various kinds of issues that are going to become part of our regular life going forward. It also means that this ever-growing city will keep demanding more water, just that, right? And what solution have we figured out for that? We keep saying we'll get more water from the Kaveri. Until there's no more water left in the Kaveri, and we have a neighbor who, we've got to share some of that water with our neighboring state as well. So it's not like we can just ignore the whole thing. The larger fix probably would be to change cropping patterns and irrigation patterns, upstream, but that's a bigger political challenge. Here, what do we need to do to be more climate ready, right? So there, if you think about it, we get enough rain in the city. If we were to harvest it right, okay, we would actually be self-sufficient. If we were to design our plumbing in such a manner that we reuse brown water for non-potable purposes, we would change the game. If we protect our drains or the original canals that linked one lake with the other. And these are not necessarily natural lakes. These are man-made irrigation structures built by our far-sighted forefathers and mothers. And those provided water through the dry season, etc. And provided for a mechanism for water to be managed. It would flow and overflow and then move on to the next tank in the chain. That was all well thought through. We came in and repurposed everything. We turned tanks into bus stands and stadia and various other public infrastructure, but not necessarily paying attention to what that purpose was. We turned lake beds, there are some layouts called Sinivagalu tank bed layout, ST bed, right? And then when it rains, we wonder why it's underwater. Right? That's where the water historically went. And we just happen to have built housing there, right? So these sorts of challenges are things that we are stuck with, but we've got to figure out ways to change the game. And then, because of how, again, citizenry, which could be industry, whoever, behaves, meaning they pass on some of their effluents to the city to manage, to the government to manage. You have strange incidents like our largest lake, Belandur, catching fire, right? So we are fairly unique in terms of being beyond future ready. We challenge with the principles of physics itself. Anyway, what we are thinking about now is another concept that our friends from WRI India and others have been engaging with the government, the concept of a blue-green city. That we must pay more attention to, to our water-related resources and how we harness them. That also we need to pay more attention to the greenery, because if we want to address climate change, we need to pay attention to the green cover that we have. If we want to address, abnormal rainfall patterns and we want to get more water absorbed within within the subsurface, well, then we need to change the way we pave the city, and we need to find ways to allow for more absorption. So all of these, the spawn city concepts, all of these, so in theory, we've got a lot of these ideas floating around, and I do think that there is commitment on the part of the government. There's commitment on the part, there's tremendous engagement, and there's convergence between the academics and the ideators, the activists and the think tanks, civil society and and the governance those of us who are involved with governance. But I should end on that somewhat negative note. When I say governance and governance structures, many of you will ask, what governance structure? Do we have an elected corporation? When is the last time we had a mayor? You know, there are all these situations where we've been postponing municipal corporation elections. You know, the city's delimitation becomes one other reason to keep pushing these things forward, etc. And so we actually have not had the devolution of power that would really empower local government to go out and make a difference. And then, of course, the ideal of funds, functionaries, and functions all being devolved to the, what you might call the foundational sector. We don't have to call it the third tier. Let's call it the foundation. This is what, you know, whether it's the village under the 73rd Amendment or the city, the urban area under the 74th, these are the foundations on which the growth of this country is built. And so let's think about how we can strengthen those foundations and combat the pulls and pressures of the political economy and work with everyone to put in place the citizen-friendly, future-ready city. Otherwise, we end up with roads which ideally you need to have infrastructure such that you don't think of government. Because only when you get into a pothole do you curse the government. You're not actually thinking of the government in a positive way. But if everything's smooth, why would you think about the government? You'd be thinking about your next great idea or what fun you're going to have somewhere, etc. Anyway, let me stop here. I think I've covered just the tip of the iceberg in terms of urban-related issues. But the commitment to making these growth engines work is very much there. Last thing that I'd like to mention to you, from the government side, from the Planning Commission side, which is what I head, we are thinking about the concept of beyond Bengaluru. We want to go to the emerging clusters. Again, we don't want to call them tier 2, tier 3 cities. These are the emerging clusters. And to see how we can make them dynamic engines of growth. Okay? Because during COVID, when people went back home and worked from home, it was perfectly fine that they could do that. Can we, retain them in the district headquarters that they came from, right? I mean, I've talked to the captains of industry here, and who are all asking them to come back to Bangalore. But eventually, over time, I think we can find, if we set up the right incubation and co-working spaces, we might find it easier for people to work from wherever they are and become the catalyst for growth in those areas. But, in theory, we keep saying we'll build satellite towns, we'll connect them with satellite ring roads and things like that. But there has to be some other logic driving, some force that drives the growth of those places. So what I've been proposing in the Planning Commission is, I've said, come, let's take a step back and look at regional development across state boundaries, right? So basically you take a step back. If you can imagine a rectangle like this with Bangalore somewhere in there, okay? And you have now industrial hubs in Harohalli, in Bidadi, in Dobaspete, in Dodballapura, okay? You get that, right? And then just south of us, beyond our Bommasandra, you have Hosur and Krishnagiri, which are in Tamil Nadu. But on the road, the old Madras road, you have Hoskote, you have Narsapura, you have Malur, which are all, if you start thinking about a rectangle like that, you start realizing that these are all industrial hubs, which are right now, people are commuting to. And there's so much space and land in between them that that's where you probably want to invest in your newer suburban, city infrastructure, because then you'll be much closer to multiple locations of work. If you're, those are not fully built up yet, you could be cognizant of the blue-green infra dimension, bring in the schools and colleges and workplaces and the 15-minute city concept. And in that manner, you would be in a position to change the way the pressures of growth would affect a city like this. And I've not spoken just about Bengaluru. I had a meeting with the Telangana Deputy Chief Minister, who's also in charge of planning, saying, why don't we do something similar with Bidar, Zahirabad, Hyderabad, with a corridor there? Somewhat similar. If you want to extend, you could go to Latur in Solapur, actually, in Maharashtra. Here you could go to Kuppam and hit Andhra Pradesh. And there's already tremendous infrastructure in terms of national highways, railways. We just have to be a little more imaginative about how we would take advantage of those and be ahead of this growth. And that's really some of the ideas that we are wrestling with at this point. Do I have time for any one or two questions, or shall we just keep it for the panel? The panelists that you invited won't give me a word, they won't give me a chance to say a word, boss. You've got some amazing guys. Anyway, yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gowda, for an insightful talk. I would request you to kindly stay back on stage and join us on the panel, please. Ladies and gentlemen, today's session will focus on making Indian cities future-ready for our citizens. Please join me in welcoming our panelists for the discussion on stage. Ms. Jaya Dhinrao, may I kindly welcome you on stage, ma'am. Executive Program Director, Sustainable Cities and Director, WRI India. May I kindly call Mr. M.N. Anuchet, Joint Commissioner of Police Traffic, to kindly join us on the stage, please. Mr. Naresh V. Narasimhan, sir, Principal Architect and Managing Partner of Venkataraman & Associates. Ms. Nitya Ramesh, the Director of Urban Design, Jana Urban Space Foundation. Mr. Vivek Mittal, Executive Director, Deloitte, India. The session will be moderated by Mr. Udit Misra, Associate Editor, The Indian Express. May I please request you to please join us on stage, sir. Over to all of you all.
Thanks. Can you hear us? Yeah. Okay, so thanks, Mr. Gowda, for that very comprehensive keynote speech. There are many points I kept taking notes, and sort of in keeping with trying to talk in common man's language, it seems almost like it's like a T20 innings, the urbanization problem, that if you delay too much, then there's too much to be done and the whole inning collapses because you're trying to keep pace with more and more challenges that you may not be able to keep pace with. And you said a very pertinent point that much of our governance comes across as reactive. And that's part of the problem, that you're just looking back and trying to solve for that and not actually looking ahead and seeing where it's going. There's this favorite quote that I keep getting reminded of, is that it's taken from the ice hockey game. It says that don't go where the puck is, go where the puck is going to be. That's where you win the game. So, I mean, the whole idea behind the session is to sort of look at future ready, go beyond reactive solutions. Just a quick note that we're trying to have a conversation which most common people can understand. So, my request to all panelists to sort of not talk in very technical terms, maybe simplify it for lay readers. And we have around 40-45 minutes for the discussion. And I have two broad questions, and we'll go one by one in two rounds. One is, what ails with the current state of urbanization? All of you come from very different streams. You have your own expertise. So I'm hoping that some specific insights will come through for our readers and our viewers of what exactly is holding back, or what are the main 2-3 hurdles. And the next round we'll sort of look at some of the solutions, whether the solutions are insight, do we need to learn from some other country, do we need to learn from within the country, from one city to another, and maybe take it forward. So, I wanted to actually start off with the Joint Commissioner of Police. Mr. Gowda quipped that maybe you were stuck in traffic, and it's a common enough problem across cities that we do not actually measure distances in kilometers. We actually measure them in minutes. And it's, in Google also, when we look at time, we always figure out, if I was to leave 20 minutes later, would it be much better, right? And Google actually answers that for you. So, I would first throw it to you there's lots, and in Bangalore in particular, this is a massive crisis with traffic. Last year I came here for a week and none of my friends would take me out anywhere. They said, just do not go. Whatever you want can come home, right? Just do not go outside. So what ails with traffic? You've seen this problem absolutely at the worst end of this country. So what ails here?
I'll require more than 45 minutes to discuss what ails Bangalore traffic. I'm sure everybody knows the issues. I think basically the vehicle population growth is exponential, whereas the infrastructure to cope with that growth is linear, to put it very simply. I think we simply don't have the infrastructure which meets the demand, right? Secondly, particularly Bangalore, we don't have sufficient users of public transport. First of all, there is lack of public transport itself. We don't have many people using public transport. There's one estimate which says about 28% of Bangaloreans use public transport, whereas other cities like Mumbai, Delhi, it's much higher. At least if you can reach 50% of people using public transport, I think that would be one solution to that. This is, in a nutshell, this is the major issue. If you go, infrastructure-wise, what are the issues? There are so many bottlenecks, literally bottlenecks. Like our road dimensions are not correct, footpaths are not sufficient or inadequate or non-existent. We are not promoting mobility. We always think in terms of traffic. I think the entire culture should change towards mobility. When you start thinking in terms of mobility and you start thinking, how can I get person A from point A to point B? What is the fastest mode of transport? What is the cheapest mode of transport? What is the greenest mode of transport? Once you start thinking along those lines, I think then the entire focus shifts. Unless if you're seeing it in a very myopic view that traffic, I think that's not going to solve anything. Only if you have that larger vision of mobility, I think that would help.
Just a follow-up question that, you mentioned that fewer people use public transport.
Yeah.
But what's your reflection that why is that the case? Is it the case that they don't like public transport? Is that fundamentally something? Why wouldn't they use public transport? Is there a thinking on that? Is there enough public transport? Is it good enough? Is it solving my commute problems?
Historically, Bangalore did not have a robust public transport system, right? Calcutta had a metro way back, since British times. We have the Mumbai local, the suburban local from long time. The problem is even the public transport in terms of, everybody talks about metro carrying 10 lakh people when it's ready. BMTC carries about 40, 50 lakh people a day, the number of trips if you calculate. But the problem is in 2000, the number of BMTC was 6,400. In 2024, it's 6,400. It didn't keep pace with the requirements of the day. So I think one is historical. We have not had robust public transport systems as other cities. Secondly, because of this, there has been a tendency to go for private transport. And today we have the moniker of being the largest number of private vehicles in India. We overtook Delhi in January. Right. So
That's quite a remarkable thing. So, okay, let's move to Mr. Narasimhan. Traffic is a specific example, and Bangalore in particular is pretty bad in that. But I wanted to ask you if you could sort of take a step back and sort of, you've had a fair time to look at not just Bangalore, but urbanization in India, the way it's going on. What is your reflection on what is wrong? What are the one or two things you think are the macro problems we have, not specific, micro?
To segue from what our commissioner says about, if you think about a city as traffic and roads, you will get a city which is traffic and roads. If you think about a city as places for people to have a life, and if you think of a city as a green city, you will think of it like that's what you'll get in the end. That somehow is missing in the larger Indian discourse. And what you said was right. And if you keep talking about traffic, you're going to get traffic. What we don't realize is you are the traffic. Right? You and me, too. Right? And that's not going to change the way we behave. In a larger Indian sense, like Professor Gowda also mentioned earlier, that the Indian political, administrative, law-making systems and policy systems have been hugely biased in front of rural development, while almost completely ignoring local development till, till the turn of the century almost. Only in the last 20 years, we are seeing some attention being paid to urban India. And take the simple example of Bangalore itself, because I know the statistics of this city, and I can't get caught talking about some Delhi problem, right? So I'll get caught if I say something about that. But just look at the analog between Bangalore, and particularly when it comes to the lens of traffic or mobility, as we want to call it. Bombay has a population of 2.4 crore. Bangalore has a population of 1.2 crore, about half. There's some debate as it must have gone up by now, but about that much, right? Bombay has 36 lakh cars, 36 lakh private vehicles. Bangalore has 1.1 crore private vehicles. It's roughly, I think it's the worst city in the world as to people to private ownership vehicle ratio, and a vast majority of those are two-wheelers. Right? A vast majority. The cars are not the problem. The two-wheelers are. And the cars in Bangalore are about what? Maybe about 15 lakhs? At least 15, not more than that. All the infrastructure that the government can think of, and I'm saying this across political parties, I'm talking about governments, is that when they hear the word development or when they hear the word mitigation, traffic mitigation, there's only one word which comes up in their mind. It's called flyover. Right? So you come up, our commissioner himself is a techie, right? So he comes from a engineering systems thinking background, and he's able to look at it as a problem which can be solved. But the political class, it's almost, everybody thinks architects and urban designers, with due no offense to Jaya and all that, but I'm saying that everybody thinks urban planners and urban designers design Indian cities. The Indian city actually is a result of a dystopic output from a cabal consisting of transport planners, consultants, politicians and bureaucracy. The architects and designers almost no role to play, almost completely. Right? And to a large extent, it's a conception where this, and I'm not saying architects and designers are the only people required. You probably need behavioral psychologists, you need economists, you need poets maybe to imagine some beautiful things. Very few people, and if we keep thinking about the city as how to get from one part of the city to the other in the fastest manner possible, I think we're going to land up in an urban mess completely. We have to completely abandon fossil fuel era models of CBD and, you know, living in the suburbs. These are all stupid Western ideas which were predicated upon availability of endless petrol. Petrol is going to run out in 15 years. So we have to figure out a way. Before that, how are we going to move around? And no, electric cars are not the answer. Because electric cars will just replace your petrol car with an electric car. That's all. The traffic congestion won't change. So I'm just harping on traffic because you said it twice, but look at Bangalore. I just end here by saying that Bangalore was conceived, the current size of Bangalore, I'm not going back too much in the past, is a map that was conceived in 1975. Okay? Slightly modified in 1985. And because of the IT guys, again slightly modified in 1995. But the overall size of the notified area of Bangalore city, which is BDA, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 1,000, close to 1,264 or 1,300 square kilometers, has never changed. No, that is the conurbation area. That I'm saying the total BDA extent is only 1,000, and that was thought of in 1975. It has never changed. And what we have done is consistently gone and eaten the green belt all around the city. Now some brown wedges are left here and there, you know, for some, and usually some reserve forest only, that would have not gone. Everything else would have got eaten. And this seems to be true of all Indian cities. And the cities are also failing, like Dr. Gowda said, to keep the growth of infrastructure provision, whether it be traffic management or whether it be solid waste management, or for that now my latest obsession is liquid waste management, because I think we are awash in a sea of sewage in Indian cities. We get a lot of nice smells if you go for a walk every day, right? And the whole system seems to be falling apart. But you come into a place like this, like look at where we are sitting now, right, all of you. We could be anywhere in the world. Everything works, air conditioning is running, lighting is perfect, we're all talking properly, correct? All you have to do is step out on the road outside and your foot will go straight into a ditch with running sewage. That is the stark contrast in it. So one of the things I think we should all do as professionals, as interested people, is now make India's outdoors as good as our indoors. Our indoors have hit as, I think, a good quality now. Everybody lives in, everybody who has access to resources lives in good quality indoors. But the outdoors, I think public spaces, the quality of our streets, the quality of also our attitudes towards garbage, all that's also got to change. I'm not saying it won't, but I don't know whether it will do that in our lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, some fantastic points about the bridges being built over the same roads, and you can see, I mean, I saw it in so many cities now, whether it is Patna or Hyderabad or now increasingly in Delhi, and you can see that this bridge will also, or the overbridge will not sustain because it's not enough. And about poets, you know, when Mr. Gowda was also talking, Cat Stevens had that lovely song, Where Do the Children Play? Which was about the whole concrete jungle that US was going through. So I think we need to sort of look at those issues. And although you've absorbed urban designers from responsibility, let me come to Nitya first. On the urban design bit, you know, from your standpoint, and you sort of are working right now on many of these issues, where do you see the larger problems in urbanization? It's not so much a traffic thing, but, you know, what are the infrastructure related issues that you see in the mindset, and the approach, the way we go about it?
I think one thing is our focus is for very large infra projects, which is not bad, which is needed, and it is needed to grow our cities. But when we look at cities for people, like one thing that struck me in the video that we all watched in the beginning is that when they were talking about cities and development, we just saw roads with hundreds of cars, and we saw flyovers and with hundreds of cars. We did not see a single visual of a busy street with hundreds of people walking and crossing, which is what would come to most of our minds when I say New York or Tokyo. And we did not see a park with children playing. So I think, firstly, to take a step back, there is not enough focus on urban design. In most governments and in bureaucracy, urban design is not recognized as a need. Urban planning is, transport planning is, but urban design is often not recognized. The design of the outdoor space, the space as soon as you step out of your home, whether it's your footpath, sidewalk, whether it's your neighborhood park, the market where you shop, is not given enough adequate importance or funding. So cities grow and these spaces organically sprout up because of need, but they're not designed. If we go to the West and you do a walking tour, one of the important places they'll take you in the walking tour is their food market. Whereas our food markets are smelly and not really nice places to go to. So I think a large problem is respecting or recognizing the need for design of our cities in between buildings, not just the buildings. And this is not just streets. Second is looking at smaller infrastructure to improve quality of life in your neighborhood. So if I have to create a compact community where within 10-15 minutes I can walk to everything I need, where my children can go to football class without assistance, where my aged parents can walk to the market and buy their apples and bananas, that is a great city. Of course, cities are engines of economic growth and we need job opportunities, but that needs to be supported with a good quality of life, which can come through planning and design.
So do you think that, typically anything happens through a lobby group, through a political process, that there is not much of a driving force, to use that expression, for urban design, that people may not be, this is not something, not everybody's house is well designed or well kept. So for urban designing you need a certain aesthetic sense and certain understanding, and that may not be the most important political issue. So is that also a massive hurdle in that sense, that it's never there?
Yeah, because I don't think, it's a fairly new field in India. And even if you look at a tender that comes out, a tender for the design of an urban street, the positions that would be put out by any government across the length and breadth of our country would be a highway engineer who would be the lead of the project. And then there would be a landscape architect. But the urban designer would be missing from that. Similarly for a park or a waterfront. So it's, whereas the design of urban spaces require, but see, that's again a technicality, right? It's like we're talking about a technicality. I don't think that is the issue. I just think we need to recognize design, urban design. We don't need to recognize urban designers. We need to recognize the importance, and by design it's not just aesthetics, it's also the engineering of it. Like a market has to be well lit, it has to be ventilated. If it's a fish market, it needs to have drainage so that the water that they constantly use goes, and there's no smell. There have to be protection so that rats and kites and cows don't enter the market. So it's, when I say urban design, that's what I mean. And so that has to be recognized, the fact that we need design of these spaces. And just to add one more point, most of the bids or contracts that are put out for our public spaces are for construction. It's not for design at all. So directly a contractor builds it, and therefore that's another failure in the function of our cities.
I'll come to Jaya last because of the sustainability angle. But with Vivek, I want to first ask, because you're also working in UP about the whole smart city framework, and that you come to cities essentially for work, for economic reasons. Everything else then follows, and then you have to sort of answer for hospitals and schools and everything. And as has been, I think, brought out by many other panelists, is that it's almost right now going in a manner that whatever was going on, we'll just retrofit to that, we'll react to that, and we'll figure out. When we think about cities, they are going to be the growth engine. So how do you sort of see that problem playing out? This whole notion that we'll grow at 7, 8, 10% and we'll become these, 4 times our income. How would that work out in cities? Won't cities drag this growth back? Why, so how do you sort of see that issue?
Yeah, so I think you very rightly said that cities attract talent. Cities are engines of economic growth, and people come to cities in search of jobs and economic growth. So as of now, all of our cities are more focused on spatial planning. How you design a master plan, and most of the cities even do not have the master plan and the spatial plans. But now the focus is more that cities should move around the economic planning of the cities. Where will I get the jobs from? Where I'll get the more employment from? And it is, when I say economic growth, it did not necessarily mean more industries, more factories and all. It means opportunities for everybody, informal economy. I think we talked about neighborhood shops and all. So we have to take all of that into consideration and say, where do my city go into the next 20 years, 30 years? And then all the policies around my spatial growth, my infrastructure growth moves around that, because we have to think of a long-term growth. And each city has its own identity, and the entire planning should move around that. For example, Bangalore was worked around IT industry and all. The city has to move around that. What kind of labor will be here, what kind of jobs will be there, what kind of infrastructure will be there, and what kind of support systems will put in. So, I mean, the government of India has already think through it. I think there is an increasing focus on making the economic plan also. I think Niti Aayog has already started a pilot project of making economic plan for 4 cities. I think Surat, Coimbatore, Vizag, and I think there's another city. So it's a good start, but I think we have a long way to go. Now, if you see India urbanization, it is not only about tier 1 and tier 2 cities. We have another 1,000 cities which are there, which has 1 lakh population and all. So few cities and a very long tail and all. So for the economic development, then we have to follow a cluster approach. We cannot follow each city specific approach and all. So a cluster-based approach is a very, very important requirement in Indian context. How do we give resources to the cluster approach? And even the entire, the talent for that, because most of the cities in tier 2, tier 3, you'll find that the local bodies have like 1 or 2 technical officials. Rest are all like conservancy workers or class C and class D workers. And if I don't build their capacities, how will I make them future cities? So, the entire cluster-based approach is very, very important for them. So cities should evolve around economic growth. There is a focus on making cities around economic growth, and I think we have to move around in that direction.
Right. Jaya, coming to you, on the sustainability bit, this is where the whole T20 innings crumbling, that, you have one problem upon another just getting piled up, and then somewhere something snaps, and you have massive urban squalor, which to be honest, there are massive surges of urban squalor already, but it can just get worse. We are seeing the rural distress that is already there. All those people are hoping that urban cities, urban areas can provide solutions. Whereas in the last 20 years, we've just gone from roughly a rural employment guarantee scheme to an urban employment guarantee scheme. So more and more states are saying we'll give that. But that cannot really be a sustainable solution. So can you share your perspective? What sort of hits you the most in terms of what's holding back or what's going massively wrong?
So thank you, Udit, for inviting me for this discussion. Very interesting. I'd just like to ask one question to start with. Who do you think is responsible for Bangalore city's sustainability, progress, any of that? Who is that person or that agency? And so that is what ails the city, right? We don't have clarity on that. We have talked a lot about, and the presentation also, I think people have talked a lot about these numbers and all of that. I would like to kind of just go to the root cause a little bit, right? To kind of demystify some of what we're saying here. We are saying, India is 30% urban. We are saying there's rapid urbanization, right? But the reality of the fact is that when you're talking about 30% urban, you're only considering a certain administrative boundary. The growth is actually happening outside of that. The growth in the last 10 years, in the last 15 years, over 150% of growth in most Indian cities has happened outside the municipal boundaries from where you're actually accounting for the urbanized population. So when you're talking about rapid urbanization, no, in terms of numbers, it's not rapid actually, right? Because city centers, within municipal boundaries are actually hollowing out. People are moving outside those boundaries. So cities are not having rapid urbanization. The urbanization is rapid, but it's not as per our census definition, right? The growth is happening outside. And if you look at, what are the socio-economic built dimensions of the definition of urban itself, urban right now for India, according to World Bank numbers, is around 57%. If you just look at, you started your video with the, the satellite imagery. If you look at that, and if you look at just build patterns, it's over 60% already, right? So the basic definition lies with what is urban. If you don't recognize these areas outside of municipal boundaries as urban, you don't provision for them. It's as simple as that, right? When it comes to anything to do with traffic, water, sewage, you name it, any service, it won't get provision for because you're simply not recognizing it as urban, right? So there's a basic, there's a flaw there, right, in the definition itself. And then you also have situations where in Bangalore, therefore, when you're building outside in the peripheries, 85% of Bangalore's blue-green infrastructure is encroached upon by built-up because it's not regularized, it's messy, it's hidden, and therefore it just gets built on in the wrong areas, right? That's one issue. Another issue is of really, finance and funding. When you look at, what is the quantum of money that we have, and we talked about infrastructure. In the last 10 years, the government has really made that a very central agenda. But climate action, environmental resource security, air quality is not an electoral agenda for anybody still, right? It does not find political salience still. Nobody's talking about that. Nothing is happening over there. And when you look at financing, well, cities need something like 10 billion, in the 1 trillion, sorry, in the next 10 years, right? That's what cities need in terms of their infrastructure growth. What we need right now is 4 times that, really, when you account for the kind of urban patterns that we have. And municipal budgets, if you look at municipal finances, they are hovering somewhere around 1% of the GDP. And just for comparisons, China's, municipal finances are around 2.8% of the GDP is what they spent on infrastructure, right? So I think the question is that who is responsible, where does this money come from? And then that leads to these whole issues of inequity in cities, inequality, and soon enough, along with climate change, that is going to be our biggest problem to solve. And the simple thing is in Mumbai, in a place like Mumbai where you have very good suburban rail, 3% of people use cars. But 75% of the investments are towards car mobility. No one's thinking of the people who are walking or cycling. Even in Bangalore, we have depending on what you consider as your boundary, we have anywhere between 8,000 to 10,000 kilometers of roads in Bangalore. And there are single digits which are walkable or where you can cycle, right? So the question, therefore, is that this is the kind of the problem, and a lot of it has to do with the city's ownership, the way that you account for urbanization, what's urban, what's not, and therefore what you plan for.
Right. Some fantastic points, because this whole issue about who to go to in cities, and that's the heart of the matter. I think right through the seminar, this point will be repeated. And also the issue of data. I mean, we don't have the latest census data. The first time we've broken that thing since 1881. And it's very difficult. I write on economy and policy. You may not have relevant data either on migration or on specifics of health and education. So how would you plan for it? It's not even, it is worse than actually retrofitting or being reactive. What do you react to? Your inflation numbers are dated. They are based on consumption patterns from 2011. Obviously, our consumption has changed. So, I mean, there are such fundamental issues with looking at it. And the ownership of how do we govern our cities, the first panel discussion that we had in the series, and YouTube has a link to that, had a long discussion on this, on what ails with it. I remember Professor Govinda Rao said that there's a congenital defect in the constitutional amendments, where it says that the states may decide, or the center may decide to give this to the third tier, and nobody decides, and most of the money doesn't go, or capacity doesn't develop. So that issue is there. Now let me get back to the part which is the most important one, which we want some substantive ideas to come through, which is to look at solutions. And I was mentioning about my last visit to Bangalore, and when we stopped at a crossing, we saw some tweaking happening, and actually one of my friends said that some innovative things are happening in collaboration with Japan. And so, I mean, maybe the Joint Commissioner can start off with the slogovers on what are the solutions, where are the solutions, and then we'll go around.
Udit,
yeah,
you
please.
asked me to sit on this panel.
Absolutely, sir.
I better say something. Anyway, the point is that since we're still identifying problems, in the governance system, right, we put in place structures which actually are not necessarily functioning. We have, planning authorities, that metropolitan planning councils and things like that that don't meet at all. We have city-wide master plans which have a futuristic agenda but have been shelved, and therefore the next one will be for 2041 or something like that. And the process also doesn't necessarily take into account enough citizen input ahead of time, right? Given the amount of talent in the city, we only come up with that plan and then say, what are your reactions, right? So that's the situation. And then we have land transport authorities, we have a whole bunch of institutional structures that are yet to take off, to put it politely.
Right, and I'm asking the Joint Commissioners to start, but please feel free. If it would really elevate the discussion if you have a point to qualify. Any one of you can join in. But yeah, starting with that on solutions bit.
Well, I think there is a need for a sort of a cultural change itself in whatever we think, right? I think there is a huge difference in what we actually know of and what we think of and what we actually do, right? That stems from, I think, it starts from schooling and from home. I think we need to catch them young and say that this is how a livable city is. This is what we need to do, because otherwise it's not going to happen. And in traffic at least, I don't want to talk about AI signals and all that. Those are just a small, fixes which you can do for a certain time, but not for all. It's not a permanent solution. It's a solution for certain thing. But we are already thinking of behavior modification, user design, right? We have, just to give an example, we have a startup here which says, I'll deliver in 10 minutes. You're incentivizing rule breaking, right? Is it possible to deliver in 10 minutes in Bangalore city? It's impossible. And we incentivize rule breaking. That guy will go against one way, he'll jump signals, right? So I think there needs to be a cultural shift in organizations in this thing, and I think starts from schools. I think we need to get that right first. Secondly, limited to the traffic thing, I think an umbrella organization which looks at transportation as such, right? We have multiple agencies working in it. We have for road infrastructure, we have 3 agencies in Bangalore city. We have the BBMP, PWD and the NHAI. For the policies, we have DULT and BBMP which is working. For management, we have traffic police. I think there are multiple agencies which are working and which not necessarily work together well all the time. Sometimes we work in silos as well. So I think an umbrella organization which looks into mobility and transportation is the need of the hour. I think it was thought of, and I think like Professor Rajeev Gowda told that it is there, but it's yet to be made functional or operationalized. So that would be the other thing I would say.
Mr. Narasimhan?
Very difficult question to answer, but I think that one thing that point is coming out repeatedly between all the people is that there's almost a total lack of coordination, particularly when it comes to Bangalore, between the BBMP and all the parastatals who control it. And this is evidenced by the daily problem that you see in the newspaper saying they tarred my road yesterday and today morning the water guys come to dig it up. What has happened is that this is actually not a difficult problem to solve. I have proposed, as an organization, we have proposed many things to the government saying, India is home to the 5 of the top 10 urban density settlements of the planet. Right? And not one city in India has a state-sponsored spatial observatory or like a city design center where proposals about the city can be viewed. You know, when we publish a master plan, we have to really pull strings if we want to see it. And people keep proposing infrastructure here without a plan. You just see an article in the paper saying 3 new flyovers planned. Nobody knows where it begins, nobody knows where it ends. So I think the city really needs a spatial planning center. We have proposed this to previous governments. It almost came through in the last government, but again, it's been under review by this government. So I think it's important at a high level to be able to have a constructive debate and like the discussion we are having now, also provide a platform for communities of the city to come together and look at, have a bottom-up idea of the city rather than a top-down idea like I pointed out. 2, the current government in its political manifesto, and I want to say it in a public forum, has recognized this problem and said that, and maybe Dr. Gowda can respond to this after this, the second point in the Congress manifesto this time, okay, it says that all the parastatals, the water board, the fire board, the traffic police, the fire department, every single, the BMTC, the metro, everybody who messes with the city on a daily basis, everybody who's got something to do with the city on a daily basis, comes under the chief commissioner of the BBMP as a primary clearinghouse of information. And this mayhem that we see right now. And it also states that the manifesto doesn't state it, but in further discussions with the political, my political friends, I've said that also have one plan across all agencies. Right now, the plan of Bangalore looks different for the police, it looks different for the BDA, it looks different for BBMP, it looks different for the water board, and the BESCOM has another idea. So that is where the mistakes are happening. So India being a city of technology, this should be easy to fix. I'll end by making one observation from an economic perspective. Bangalore is home to 6 of the largest infrastructure design and consultancy organizations of the world. W.S. Atkins has 6,000 engineers. W.S. Atkins is one of the world's top designers of urban infrastructure. And I made a rough back of the envelope calculation. These 6 people, Arcadis from Holland, Mott MacDonald, Jacobs, they employ close to 50,000 people in Bangalore. So our citizens who have to travel endlessly in traffic are going to their offices and designing the whole planet. And they can't do it for us. And maybe some organization like WRI should bring them all into a maybe 10%, 5% of their time CSR to just help us out of our urban planning problem.
Yeah, lovely points you've made. In the north, Gurgaon was this budding city one day, and within a decade it was the dying city. We were writing the stories of how Gurgaon is the promise, and within a decade we were writing that there's no water sewerage problem, there's no signboard, nothing. And so, yeah, Nitya, what's your take? Small infrastructure, but how? We will, sir, we will.
So when I say small infrastructure, especially for big cities like Bangalore, while the master plan gets made, and there are many versions and layers to the master plan. There's a comprehensive mobility plan, there's a climate action plan, and while they get all that together, the city and its people continue life, right? When we started looking at urban, we didn't have the gig economy. You didn't have your Zeptos, your Swiggies, but today we have to design for them. There are any parking problem or street design problem is half the time your delivery guys, and they're still not thought of. They don't have rest stops. They have to use the bathroom, which is the footpath. They don't have places to eat. They don't have places to rest. Women auto drivers really suffer. And these are people that we've overlooked in the planning. So when I say small infrastructure, I think a building block of the city could be the community, the neighborhood. Professor Gowda mentioned the 15-minute cities concept, right? if you look at Bangalore's individual neighborhoods, they all have their different character, their different culture. You get the communities together, we identify projects they need, quick infrastructure that can have high impact transformation for your quality of life, walkable footpaths, so that everybody can walk in their neighborhood to the public transport, to their schools, colleges, and places of work. It really improves air quality, it improves public health, especially non-contagious diseases like obesity, cardiovascular diseases, like diabetes. Improves congestion, of course. And then parks, open spaces, spaces to access some sort of culture, leisure, right? All of this is important for quality of life. Right now, we only care about where we work and the long commutes back to home. We suffer from time poverty. There is no time for art, culture, leisure, which then brings up our society, which really makes a vibrant life. If you go to the West, apart from work, each community, each neighborhood will have a series of festivals. The community will come and participate. There'll be sales, there'll be, parades, there'll be all sorts of things, which is the other layer we need for our city. And the third piece of small infrastructure is places of commerce. Good vending zones, access to fresh produce, promote sustainable ways of consumption of food, right? It makes no sense. In Gurgaon, somebody told me that agricultural policies are changing to grow more broccoli, to grow more mushrooms. But we need to eat within a 100-kilometer radius of what grows and promote our sustainable food consumption patterns. And the last is to create enough inclusive infrastructure. Cities will have migrants coming in, even if not to the core, to the periphery. We need to be prepared for it. Otherwise, we'll always be chasing our tails. Today, we're always designing for the problems and solving for symptoms. We're not systems thinking and solving for the future. So we need migrant resource centers. We need enough rental housing. When a migrant comes in, dormitories, especially for women, safe places, little working women's hostels. We need social infrastructure like childcare, community centers, small marriage halls, crematoria, burial grounds where the poor can dispose of their dead with dignity. So we need all of this. This is what I mean by small infrastructure. And while, of course, we need our flyovers, our tunnels, our metros, but this is what makes the city, the fabric of a city. And the second point I would like to make is, it's not just our big cities. Of course, big cities are where the talent is and where the money is. But we need to focus on building our small cities and create them as magnets, right? To make them your pull cities. Right now, they're all push cities. And they service a larger rural area. And many, many other Western cities have done this with success. There are villages in Switzerland which have urban infrastructure, which give you the quality of life that you aim for in an urban place. Same way for many agricultural towns in England as well. So that would be the second point. We need to strengthen and prepare our big cities for what's coming and for what has already happened. But meanwhile, our small cities, our peri-urban areas need to learn from these and prepare, especially in terms of climate and sustainability. So they don't have to come down this path of a Bangalore before, and then work towards that.
Right. Vivek, what's your take?
I think our expectations from cities are always increasing, and it's ever increasing always. So, but I think there's a mismatch here because our cities are not autonomous. The 74th Constitutional Amendment started it, but even for a small sum of money or a project, cities have to run to the state government and all. So I think in the future, if you want cities to be urbanized, you're looking at the future cities should be more autonomous, the entire functions, and they should be having power to raise the taxes, how they want to do the revenue. I think that's the first thing that we should be focusing on. Second thing is accountability, and I think Sir briefly talked about it. I mean, in the city, there should be one accountable person. In the state, there is one department who does everything. In cities, we did a study for one department, and even for one traffic signal, there were some 7 agencies involved who will put the camera on it, who will design the pillar, and also accountability is very, very important. And I think the third thing that we need to focus, and I think there's already a lot of push towards, is technology. You have seen cities preparing, taking almost like say 8-10 years to prepare a master plan. So I mean, in today's world, when we have digital twins, I can have a virtual replica of the entire cities. I mean, I cannot afford to take 4 or 5 years to prepare a master plan. By that time, the urban nature of the city would have completely changed. So I think we need to leverage technology. We need to make investment in people in the technology so they also understand the technology. And I think the third thing is, in my opinion, the open government. The urban is a very complex subject. I mean, few officials in the state government cannot resolve it. So, I mean, the partnerships with civil society organizations, industries, research institutes, startups. I mean, startups and some of very, very innovative solutions and all. So cities should enable these partnerships, collaborations and all, I mean, to look into the future. So these are some of the thoughts.
Right, thank you. Jaya, we have 3-4 minutes and last word to him before we open it up.
Yes, so I think a couple of things. One is that, we have to figure out what we are solving for, right? So instead of saying that we want to solve for congestion, I think the question should be, we need to solve for productivity and livability. Turn that question on its head and then you will find better solutions. And in order to do that, the kind of structures that you need, the governance structure that you need departmental, we keep talking about departmental coordination and this, that and the other. If you look at the master plan of any city in India, you will see that only those projects out of the master plan get implemented, if ever, which have agency with only one department, which have one department single ownership. Anything that requires coordination, cooperation, any of those words, doesn't get done, right? So basically what this means is we need integration. And actually integration is good. And this is also in lines of, having, one agency looking at transport, for example, because what happens then is you're able to pool resources and you're able to take a systems view to the problem and not look at it, from your sort of myopic lens of what you're trying to solve for. So that's one. The other is I do think that, right now with the climate urgency that, that's on our head, we need solutions at speed and scale, right? And data and innovation hold really good promise for India. One is that now we have access to data, whether it's government data or data coming from open sources that we didn't have before, right? So now we're able to baseline, we're able to project, we are able to, look at what are the different scenarios, what are the pathways that we can choose from. So I think that is really good and we need to get better at using that to our benefit. And the other is innovation. And what gives me really hope is that, while some may think of this as band-aid solutions, they don't necessarily need to be, right? In India, in just the last 7 years, the number of MSMEs and startups who are solving civic problems, who are solving, climate problems, has gone up dramatically. And in just terms of investment, I'll give you a number. It's gone up from 0.1 billion in 2015 to 3.7 billion in 2022, right? That's the scale of investment that's happening in these kind of organizations which are trying to solve some of these problems. So that's, I think there's great hope there. And finally, I feel like this is a problem that is going to need partnerships. We are not going to be able to solve this by ourselves. No one organization, not 10, not 100 organizations are going to be able to solve this on themselves. And so we need to kind of step out of our comfort zone, build the kind of partnerships that are needed to solve this problem. PPPs in India, investment in PPPs has gone down dramatically in just the last 3 or 4 years. And that's actually not good news, right? So we need to figure out what kind of partnerships we need to forge to now solve these problems. So,
right.
Thank you.
Dr. Gowda, there seems to be a crying need for leadership, for a captain to put the fielders where they should be. What's your last word on this?
The team, the governance team, is actually working on this. We are taking the manifesto promise of creating an integrated entity together. We're taking that forward. I'm part of a Better Bengaluru committee that actually has come out with a blueprint for that. And in my own experience, when I talked about introducing metro feeder buses, Anuchet will remember this, we had to do multiple meetings of various departments to just get the coordination to put that metro feeder bus in place. And at the end, there were some who were not cooperating very much either. Okay, so it was quite a challenge. So integrating is going to be the way we're going forward, but making sure that integration works is a different organizational challenge in of itself. That's one side. The other side is our government, the Siddaramaiah government. Our Deputy Chief Minister, Mr. Shiv Kumar, is in charge of Bengaluru City. And he's organized various sort of initiatives which are focusing on different dimensions of brand Bengaluru. One could be about how to make this a more vibrant city with more festivals and taking the dimensions of life and making them come alive. We're also looking at heritage, right? I mean, we're conceiving of a heritage walk from South Bangalore to the Palace, which would be walkable and which would become a tourist attraction in of itself. We're talking about making this a healthier city and a more inclusive city. We're talking about, so these sorts of ideas have been generated by various committees that have been engaged with academics and with civil society and other people concerned, experts of various kinds. So where are we in this process? I think we're collating these ideas, and then I think there's a big election coming up, and after that is when you'll actually see some movement. But the ideation part of it has moved forward, and now I think the implementation is what will follow.
Right, thanks. Elections have become like the Bumrah over. You have to wait for them to get over for anything to get done. Okay, we have absolutely overshot our time, so we'll have time for 2, max 3 questions. So, do we have the mics that side? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, we can take more questions, but please ask the question, do not make a statement, just ask the question. We are absolutely out of time.
Yeah, hi, this is Rao here. We are only just talking about the problems, but basically pointing out onto each one of them. Is there a way wherein we could think about pointing at ourselves and say, yes, what is my role in terms of making the traffic free? And that's where each one of them has to think about. Sir was making about only 2-wheelers were the problem in Bangalore city. But according to me, it's not the 2-wheelers what are causing the problem, it's the 4-wheeler. If you see many of the 4-wheelers, only one passenger driving the car, and just want to show that I have a car and taking so much of space.
Right.
Those things to be avoided.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Sir, I'm Commodore G.J. Singh.
Yes.
I'm a retired naval officer. I was speaking on the various channels also. As a concerned Bangalorean, with the flooding of water on the roads and sewage system and all that. What I want to point out here is that there are 2 major problems which are unperceived by our planners. And I think if they are addressed, 80% of our problems in India, across India, and all the cities will be solved.
Very quickly.
Number 1 is that we have to start looking at the infrastructure below the surface of the earth. We do not have a proper sewerage system which can cope up. We still have the cities where the open drains, people are using them in all over India. Here in Bangalore itself,
except
I live here close by. You have that along the MEG. Number 2. Just a minute. Number 2.
Yeah.
Number 2 is the problem of coping up with the water when there is a burst of rain.
Okay.
That is another problem. So therefore, looking upward, we need to look downward and create an infrastructure which can sort of address the problem.
Accepted. Specific questions, not statements, please. Here somewhere, there are a lot of hands here, this side. Center. Please ask questions, huh? Don't. It's not.
I am Dr.
Yeah, we talked about the planning, the remote, the long-term planning. We have national building code. We have national electric code. Why don't we have national urban planning code? Because it would clarify what solutions we want to have for our cities.
Okay.
Right? He already mentioned about the congenital defect in the 74th and 75th planning amendment. The answer is evident in that. So the question is really moot.
Yeah.
Don't even have transportation as one of the
problem
topics.
is that the amendments have come up with a time when a mega city was 2 million people. Right now, Bangalore is 13 million people.
No, but 74th Amendment doesn't have transportation as one of the 18 points.
Let's have other people
there are
ask questions.
congenital defects.
That lady had started.
That lady.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Arpita, and I am the founder for Cherry Skills Learning Private Limited. And now, I saw the theme of this event, which is India, future ready and citizens. So what is the plan on human development? Because if we just bring in an analogy of organization and human resources, likewise, India and citizens, so what is the plan for human development when, and in the context of education, skill development, and health?
Okay.
So I would like to have some insights on that, please.
Let's have another question just behind you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, please.
So hi, I'm Supreet. I'm founder of a startup which is Wulu. It's a world of loos. So we are in 400 cities and we are an Airbnb of washrooms. So we are with the Mumbai railways and metros. So we create the washrooms. So my very quick question is I wanted to connect, and thanks for this event which has been done. So I'm looking forward for these kind of events where we know that whom is to approach quickly for these things.
Okay,
yeah, thank you
please.
so much.
The person behind you. The person behind, please. He's been asking.
It's that if you can ask a question rather than telling us about what you do, it will make more sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So my name is Preetham. I come from a company called Hexa Climate, and we work more on sustainability. The question which I would directly want to ask is that this event is well designed called cities, but we majorly missed something which is more sustainable approach towards the city is energy. So is there is any committee or is there is direct to Jaya ma'am that are we sustainably planning any power related or any energy or any net zero path?
Of course, there is. I mean, there is an entire department devoted to that, and there's even a minister department devoted to that, both at the central and state levels. I do not understand why you say that. Is there anything going on? Of course, there is.
Okay, gentle lady there. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Did you call me the gentle lady? Thank you so much. Just had one question because we are looking at citizens and ground up movement and behavior change. We spoke so much about that. I just had a question directed towards Professor Rajeev Gowda. From the state side, is there a citizens platform where citizens can actually come, participate, give their suggestion? I'm not talking about the Sahaya app. It's not grievance. It's basically a citizen engaging with the city. And how are you leveraging technology to do that?
Dr. Gowda, would you want to take it?
Many times we have public consultations, right? But what we are doing is just the first step. I think, when I talked about the master plans not taking inputs until it's already practically frozen, those are all processes that need to be fixed. So this is something that's a work in progress. If you want to technologically enable that, I think that's also doable. But for example, when it comes to ideas for improving the city, Mr. Shivkumar says we have 70,000 plus inputs that we got when we opened up the platform for ideas. So there are, so then processing them, classifying, organizing, figuring out which ones to take forward. That's where next steps are.
Okay, last two questions. One, this gentleman, and one gentleman there in the white shirt.
I'll keep it very sharp. My name is Murli Satya. We have a lot of abandoned vehicles in Bangalore, which is choking up the roads and our residential areas. We have highlighted this issue in some of the local corporators, to the local MLAs. We keep hearing about this problem being addressed. We have raised it to, given complaint to Times of India and others, but those vehicles don't get towed.
We have better than Times of India here. We have the Joint Commissioner.
So the bottleneck is in basically the time taken for disposal of the vehicle. It takes about 9 months under the current rules and procedures we have. So we approached the Honorable High Court in a recent petition, and certain directions are awaited, and this thing was positive. So if you can reduce it to the end point is, if you have an abandoned vehicle on road, if I put it in my police station, if I don't have it for 9 months, the garbage has gone from point A to point B, that's all, right? So if we can dispose it, so it will be a one-time thing where we do it in one shot. Say we can do it in 1 month, that will be ideal. So once that is in place, I think we can dispose of all the abandoned vehicles. We have a process in place, we have identified also. It is just that if the thing is sorted out, we can dispose it, and after that it will be a routine thing.
Okay, last question, please make it a sharp one.
I ask in all sincerity, right? So what are the action items here, and who's going to take point on those things, right? So what's the outcome? I mean, how?
What's the outcome of this event?
Yes, exactly. And who's going to take action on those things?
That sent me into deep reflection. Let me thank all the panelists and the keynote speaker, Dr. Gowda. Very insightful issue. I think one of the chief agenda items for us is to trigger a conversation so that people go back thinking, understanding. For example, for me, what the Joint Commissioner said about behavioral change in kids, catching them young and telling them something, that there's a different world that you need to create. That is where I think most substantive changes will happen. And the other thing is obviously not having a clear leader in command of this whole exercise, that a point that sort of resonated across all speakers. So those two were the main takeaways for me. Very grateful to each one of you for your time and your insights. Thanks a lot, and thanks to all of you for a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists and our moderators. Thanks to each one of you who joined this insightful panel discussion and to your Q&A sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, we extend a heartfelt thanks to all our esteemed guests present today, whose presence has contributed to the success of this evening as we anticipate the festivities ahead. Thanks to each one of you for this great evening and a knowledge and a thoughtful one. To each one of you who were present here to actually grace this evening too. Thank you. This was your very own host, Fawzia P. Khan, signing off from the Indian Express Think Our Cities, presented by Omidyar Network India.